Hey dear subscribers, this is the revision lecture of chapter 8 motion. The entire thing would be devised in form of the mind maps or some form of the graphs and derivations and everything. So stay tuned and just listen the lecture thoroughly and let's get started with it. Let's get started with motion. First of all, motion is movement, right? So movement we can define in terms of change in position. Whenever there is change in position, that is movement. Now we have to study this motion in three categories. One is change in motion, change in position. Second is the types of motion that we've seen in this chapter. And third is about the rate of motion. Now see, how have we studied this change in position? This change in position we are going to categorize into two. First one is our distance, right? So what is distance? Distance was the actual length of the total path covered by the body. Whatever path the body is taking, total distance, to find out the total distance, we have to add up all the units or all the digits, right? Now this is a scalar quantity. That would mean that the direction doesn't matter. It's a scalar quantity. But how about the displacement? For displacement, we have to see our initial position, we have to see our final position, and we're going to join them by a straight line. That shortest distance is going to be our displacement. Displacement is a vector quantity. That means we have to consider direction in it. So therefore displacement can be positive, negative, it can be zero. Zero कब होता है? Whenever object return to the same initial position, displacement is going to be zero. But about distance, it cannot be zero because if you have started traveling, there would be some length of the path covered, so it can never be zero. Displacement will always remain shorter than or equal to displacement. Distance will always be greater or equal to displacement. And next we have to talk in terms of type of motion. So type of motion, we've studied them in three manner: uniform motion, non-uniform motion, and uniform circular motion, right? So uniform motion, non-uniform motion, uniform circular motion. Uniform motion means uniform, similar, right? So what kind of, in what terms I'm talking? In terms of distance I'm talking, that it is going to cover equal, same distance in equal interval of time, right? How about non-uniform? Unequal distance is an equal interval of time. That is going to be non-uniform. It is not equal. Circular motion means the body is traveling, instead of straight line path, it is going to cover a circular motion. But when we are saying uniform motion, uniform circular motion, we mean that the speed would remain constant. But in a circle, we know that direction keeps on changing. So velocity changes, because what is velocity? It is a vector quantity. If direction changes, velocity can change. Since velocity changes, then uniform circular motion is going to be an accelerated motion. This is a common frequent asked question. Now, the formula for uniform circular motion is to find out the velocity. It's 2 pi r by t, right? Why 2 pi r? Because circular, you are traveling on the circumference. Hence, 2 pi r divided by the time. Now, moving on to the rate of motion. The rate of motion also we can categorize this into two. One is our speed and the other one is our velocity. Okay, so speed. What is speed? We can relate speed to distance, right? So speed is whatever distance you are covering per unit time. So distance traveled per unit time. As speed is about distance, distance was a scalar quantity, speed is also going to be a scalar quantity. That means direction doesn't matter here. The formula for speed is going to be distance upon time, right? From the definition, we can categorize speed as distance upon time. Now, talking about velocity, since we're talking about direction, therefore it's a vector quantity, and direction, this velocity is going to be speed with direction. So speed matlab distance with direction, so distance with direction becomes displacement. Hence, we define velocity as displacement per unit time. Of course, this is in short forms that I've written. You have to tell that velocity of a body can be defined as the displacement covered by the body per unit time. And it's a vector quantity. What will be the formula for speed? Distance upon time. What about velocity? Displacement upon time. See, displacement or distance we represent by S. Speed or velocity we represent by V. Okay. Now see, now we have talked about the different types of speed and different types of velocity. right? So we have learned about uniform speed, non-uniform speed, average speed, instantaneous speed, velocity mole, again uniform speed, non-uniform speed, average, uniform velocity, non-uniform velocity, and average velocity, correct? So today, in terms of formula, we're going to revise it. See, average speed हमने पढ़ा था. When do we have to find out the average speed? When the body is not moving with uniform speed. So if you have non-uniform speed, and if they're asking you what is the average of the journey, then you have to calculate average speed, which is total distance upon total time. What's the formula of average speed? Total distance upon total time. Now, in the similar manner, we can talk about average velocity also. So, what will be the average velocity? It is the initial velocity plus final velocity by 2. See, I've written this together so that you can clearly make out the difference between average speed and average velocity. Average speed is total distance upon total time, whereas average velocity is initial velocity plus final velocity by 2. Okay. So, again, average you have to calculate when it is a non-uniform motion. And initial velocity को we denote by u, final velocity we denote by v. Okay, so velocity and speed we generally denote by v, but when there are two types, that is initial, final, then it becomes u and v. Because initial comes first, so u, then final we talk in terms of v. Moving on to next, which is the rate of change of velocity. So see, now this velocity can change with time. So that means we have to talk about rate of change of velocity. When we talk about rate of change of velocity, it becomes acceleration. So whenever body changes its velocity, then that means that body is accelerating. Okay. Now the formula for acceleration is acceleration will only happen whenever there is change in the velocity. The formula becomes acceleration is equals to change in velocity upon time. Okay, change in velocity upon time. Before we move further, I want to tell you one thing. This is a question asked in the exam, that when can average speed be equals to average velocity? Whenever body traveling in a straight line motion, that means there is no change in its direction, then speed will be equal to velocity. In the similar manner, distance will be equal to displacement only when the body is traveling in a straight line motion. Okay, coming back to acceleration. So acceleration is change in velocity upon time. So change in velocity will always be final minus initial. So that means v minus u by t. Okay. Now acceleration ko we can categorize in this way. See, if final velocity is greater, see, formula is v minus u, right? So if final velocity is greater, acceleration is going to be positive. Whenever you are in a motion such that your speed is increasing, you tell it that it's an accelerated motion. But if suddenly brakes are applied, then what would happen? Your final velocity is going to be less than the initial one. If it is less than the initial one, then acceleration is going to be negative and it is going to be a retarded motion. So acceleration can be 3. It can be positive, negative, 0. Positive if the final velocity is greater than the initial, negative when final is smaller than initial, and 0 when final velocity is equals to initial velocity. I hope this is the basic concept we've learned about motion in this chapter. I hope it is clear: distance, displacement, speed, velocity, acceleration, and the types of motion. Okay, and all the formulas are here on this particular here in front of you in this particular frame. So you can just revise up all the formulas also. Now moving ahead.